Hi everybody, welcome to this short lecture on the sonnet, literally meaning little song in Italian. Um, Last week we talked about just some basic steps that we can take to explore a poem, and I think it's really important that we first read the poem aloud and really hear the sounds that the poem makes. For example, with the poem Digging, as he literally digs into his memory of his father and grandfather working in the potato fields, the speaker, the poem, really makes use of onomatopoeias like the squelching and mulching and all the kind of wet sounds of working in the field. And so I think it's really important to read the poem aloud. Please don't skip this part. And also just paraphrase what the poem is saying. It could be as simple as the speaker sitting at his desk is remembering what his father and his grandfather used to do, which is to dig in the potato fields. Identify the antecedent scenario. What was happening before the poem? In other words, what triggered? Maybe is there a conflict that came into the scene? What triggered the speaker to suddenly uh, engage in this poem? I think it's important to try to kind of divide up the poem into certain parts, and especially if there are any turns in the poem where maybe initial problem that the speaker is worried about starts to shift into more of a resolution, or you notice that the speaker's attitude towards a certain topic is starting to turn. You want to analyze the craft, and we'll talk more about this, but I think with poetry, it's wonderful because the content oftentimes really matches the vehicle that it comes in. And really the compressed language of poetry really allows us to do some close reading, really savor what's going on in the poem. And finally, of course, we want to move on to interpreting the poem. So with regards to sonnets, that it would be helpful for us to spend a week or so on the sonnet form, particularly because it's a fixed form, it's not free verse, and I think it lends to a good sort of close analysis. And the sonnet has a really rich history. Um, it's one of the most persistent fixed forms, recognized by 14 lines with a traditional kind of rhyme scheme. And it originated in the Middle Ages in Italian and French poetry, particularly the Italian poet Petrarch. He wrote a series of sonnets where he's addressing his beloved Laura. And the sonnet kind of migrated over to England in the 16th and early 17th centuries and was really made popular by Shakespeare, by Spenser, um, and it continues to be popular. It was revived several times in the 19th century onward. And the sonnet, I think it's important to note that even though we read them in isolation, many of the sonnets were written as a sequence. For example, Shakespeare's sonnets number over 120 in total, and there's kind of a loose narrative that starts to emerge while you're reading Shakespeare's sonnets. How he's trying to woo and persuade this younger beloved to fall in love with him, and later on there's sort of this dark lady that comes into the scene to disrupt this, to form a little love triangle. We're not going to have a chance to read Shakespeare's sonnets in its entirety, but one of the poems that you're reading for this week is from that sequence. And there are some typical sort of themes, the lover addressing the beloved. Sometimes we'll hear from the lady. However, most oftentimes we're sort of trapped in the perspective of the speaker. There's some themes of unrequited love. And the sonnet often takes the structure of presenting and describing a problem and then turning to a kind of a resolution. Now, no lecture in sonnet form would be incomplete without kind of a reference to two types of sonnets. And I'm not going to quiz you on this or anything, but I think it's helpful to know that typically people think of two categories of sonnets. One is the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, and the other is called the English or Shakespearean sonnet. Both of them have similar structures, except for where the churn typically comes. The Italian sonnet will set up a conflict and in the first 8 lines, the octave, and then there will be a volta or churn to kind of resolve the conflict in the last 6 lines or the sestet of the poem. In Shakespearean sonnet, typically the structure follows 3 stanzas of 4 lines, 3 quatrains, and then a final rhyming couplet. And typically it'll follow an ABAB rhyme. And the volta, the churn, usually tends to come with the last 2 lines, the couplet. It's not always the case that everything written by Shakespeare follows this structure, but much of it follows the structures that we can identify certain sonnets as Shakespearean and others as Petrarchan. And this is just helpful background information for you to know. But more interestingly, let's take a look at the sonnet When in Disgrace by Shakespeare, just to get a feel for how we might do a close reading of this poem. And let's just begin with reading it aloud. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented lest. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Notice how the second line, the speaker is beweeping his outcast state. We're not sure exactly what the details are, but that sense of being in disgrace, being in isolation, a lot of it is sort of an inwardly focused sense of despair. And even though this was written in, Renaissance England, I think the sentiments and the emotions expressed in this sonnet are very relatable. And for the speaker, he talks about his outcast state, and then he refers to his state again. By the end of the sonnet, I scorn to change my state with kings. And what's the conflict? How does it resolve itself? Those are some questions I'd like for you to focus on for our upcoming discussion board posting. So where do you detect changes in tone? Where would you identify the churn in this sonnet? I want to kind of note the implicit pun between haply. The word hap was synonymous with the word fortune. or not fortune as in treasure, but fortune as in just the turning of the wheel of fortune, and literally meant sort of by accident. And also, you can hear the word happily as well. So for the discussion board that you'll share with the class, I'd like to have you guys answer the question of, yeah, where is the turn in this sonnet, and what argument does this poem establish? How is it resolved? How does that sense of being in disgrace get answered? And what kind of evidence does the poem present? So you'll find the full details on discussion board, but please note that this is a Monday midnight deadline. And then for our upcoming homework, I want to draw your attention to our course syllabus for a second. So this upcoming week, we're looking at sonnets and argumentation. And for Thursday's deadline, I'd like for you guys to read a poem, another sonnet from a sonnet sequence called Holy Sonnets by John Donne. And he's a writer who comes a little bit later than Shakespeare. And I'd like for you to read this poem and complete the annotation work for this poem by Thursday night. Please note that this poem relies on some of the conventions of love poetry in its tone of desperation and asking for a response from the beloved, but sort of with a twist. And I'll talk more about this in the handout for the work, but please make sure to complete this work and give yourself enough time for this, because this is the work that I'm asking you to do. Here's the sonnet, and then you'll notice that I'm asking you to go ahead and annotate and mark up the poem. So try your best first to paraphrase this poem. What's the antecedent scenario? Who's the speaker addressing? I'm okay if you're not able to identify like every single instance of figurative language, but it would be good if you notice, any use of, say, like alliteration, break, blow, burn, sort of a repetition of consonant sounds. You could kind of note that, and what effect that has on your reading of the poem. So you don't have to write every single thing, okay? But I'd like to just see you demonstrate that you can mark up the poem, you can circle similar words, you can kind of note where, gosh, how does this poem resolve itself? So make sure to look up this word ravish, and how does this verb fit or not fit in with what the speaker desires. So this is a Dropbox assignment that will be due by our usual Thursday midnight deadline, and you'll see this handout attached to the Dropbox assignment for this week. Okay, so thanks for viewing this short lecture on the sonnet. Please let me know if there's any issues, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from you on both discussion board and through Dropbox. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.